but she's also concerned with status and position. And I don't like her. I can tell she's up to something. She just kind of gives me that vibe. All right, y'all. So I'm here. This is Ty again. Remember that I said in my introductory video that I was going to do some reviews. So I am going to actually review House of the Dragon, which is an HBO series, and it is the prequel to the Game of Thrones. Now, I have been trying to record this video since Tuesday. I had my camera equipment set up, my green screen, and it was something about me recording that just didn't seem authentic in a sense, I guess you can say. It kind of felt like I was doing a news broadcast, and it's hard. It's really hard. So I guess I'm gonna have to continue to practice on it, and hopefully eventually I get to that stage where, you know, I can use my green screen and actually do my reviews. All right, now listen, I am so excited, y'all. I am so excited because this show is so good. It's so good. So what I'm going to do is just actually review it. And in the end, I am going to kind of add, you know, my takeaways. Because to me, even though this is a fictional story, of course, because you got dragons and all. Now, although it is fiction, there are still some things that I think that the writer wants to convey to the audience. So, are you ready for House of the Dragon? All right, so yes, we are in season 1, as I said earlier, and this is episode 1, which is called The Heirs of the Dragon. Now, you don't necessarily have to have seen Game of Thrones before. You can technically follow along because this is the prequel. But if you have seen it, then you can kind of pretty much get a feel for the characters and the events. This first episode, there are about 7 main characters, I guess you can say. The very first character is Viserys, and he is the newly appointed king, and his wife, the queen, her name is Emma. Together they have a daughter, and her name is Rhaenyra, and she is their only child. Then you have the king's cousin, who is named Rhaenys. And the king's brother, his name is Daemon. Now, you know his name is Daemon, so it's going to be some conflict, of course. I'm just being funny. Then you have the last 2 characters. His name is Otto, and he is actually the king's hand. And, well, right-hand man, he's the hand. And then Otto's daughter, her name is Alicent, and she is also Rhaenyra's, who is the daughter, her best friend. Okay, so the episode kicks off with Heirs Targaryen. He's the current king, and he's sitting on the Iron Throne. And he summoned all of the people to the courtroom, I guess, so he can get ready to name who the next heir will be. Now, the next heir will not be one of his children because both of his sons have died. And so he's called on the Great Council to make the decision as to who it would be, because he kind of knew there would be a conflict if he were to name the heir. So he has descendants, which are his grandchildren, and those grandchildren are cousins, and one is named Rhaenys, and the other one, of course, is Viserys. Now, Rhaenys is a female, and anytime, you know, of course, you're always seeking a male heir to be in line or succession, because females, of course, considered to be weak, and no female has occupied the Iron Throne before. They end up naming who the next heir would be, and it is Viserys. Now, Rhaenys doesn't verbalize her issue or her bitterness. You can just kind of see in her eyes that she's not pleased with not being, you know, named the next heir. All right, so the scene shifts to Rhaenyra. She's going to visit her mother, who is resting. Her mother is actually about to give birth to hopefully would be a son, so that he can be the next heir to the throne. Now, Rhaenyra is somewhat of a tomboy, I guess you could say. She loves riding her dragons. She said that she would rather be a knight on the battlefield fighting than to kind of, you know, do things that girls would do in a sense. She actually reminds me of Arya Stark from the Game of Thrones. However, Arya is a little bit more masculine. So Rhaenyra is kind of, you know, I'm not trying to sound sexist or anything, but she's a little bit more balanced in a sense, as in a female, and still loving to do things that males do. they're sitting there talking, and her mother is basically just, she knows those characteristics about her daughter, and she's trying to shift her from that, just to let her know that her main duties one day would be to bear her husband's children and hopefully give birth to a son. Now, what I really like is the parallel that the mother just kind of tries to get Rhaenyra to visualize you know, how things would be. She basically tells her that, you know, yeah, she wants to fight, but her fight won't be on the battlefield. It will actually be her giving labor or having children. So the king is longing for a male heir, of course, and Rhaenyra knows it. And she really feels like she's insignificant in his eyes because, you know, he wants a son and they haven't been able to have the relationship that they should have because of that. Now, the Great Council is meeting, and they're just kind of going back and forth as to see who the next heir would be. And the king is trying to assure, you know, the Great Council that he knows for a fact that his wife Emma is going to have a boy. Okay, so Daemon Targaryen, who is the king's brother, he's secretly come into town, and he's actually sitting on the Iron Throne. So Rhaenyra finds out that he is there, and she goes to visit him, and basically like, why are you sitting here? And he's saying that, you know, the king is honoring him as the next heir at the games that they're going to have. And she's saying, no, that's going to be for, you know, my, hopefully, brother, because he will be the next heir. So they're kind of just having some banter going back and forth. And you can kind of tell that the Daemon, of course, he does have that conniving evilness about himself, but he is somewhat of a swindler. So he actually goes up to Rhaenyra and he gives her this necklace that's made out of Valyrian steel. And so Valyrian steel is, if you know, you watch Game of Thrones, then you know it's how they make their swords, and it's very like of high quality. But anyway, he's just kind of, you know, trying to get her loyalty and her trust by giving her that necklace. It kind of reminds me of the Lion King in a sense, like with Mufasa, Scar, and Simba. Just you can tell that she has a connection with her uncle. The scene shifts to Rhaenyra and Alicent, which is her best friend. That's also, as I mentioned, the king's Han's daughter. They're just laying in the yard, just talking, and they're totally different characters. I honestly don't understand why they're friends. Alicent is very prissy, but she's also concerned with status and position. And I don't like her. I can tell she's up to something. She just kind of gives me that vibe. But she's basically just talking to Rhaenyra and saying, you know, your dad is going to abandon you once the new heir is born. And Rhaenyra honestly doesn't care. She does not care about status. She just wants to be living in the moment. She just wants to be a girl that loves to do what she does. Okay, now the king has somehow injured himself. He said that he punctured his back or whatever from, you know, the spikes that are on the Iron Throne, which I do think are poisonous. Somebody's done something to it, and the doctor has come in to assess it, and it will not heal for some reason. So he's not really concerned about it, but you can tell that this will be a part of the plot. He goes to visit his wife, who is actually, you know, getting a bath and laying in the tub, just resting. And he's talking, they're having this intimate, deep conversation. And the wife is tired. Sis is tired, baby. You can tell that she has been through a lot, and mentally and physically, she feels like her body cannot do it anymore. But she does share with him that, which was alarming because, like I said, Rhaenyra is their only child. But she shares with him that, and looking in his eyes and basically just saying, I cannot do this anymore. I know you want a male heir. I've been trying to give you one. She said she actually has been pregnant basically 5 times in the last 10 years. So that's a lot for her to go through to try to give him something that, of course, is tradition. And what kind of got me teared up in a sense is that, like, she was so vulnerable, and she shared with him that, you know, I can't mourn no more dead children. And that was deep. Okay, so now they start to highlight Daemon, and Daemon is in charge of the City Watch, which is kind of like, I guess you can say, the chief of police. And he basically thinks he's God. He's been given men to help patrol the city, and those men were once upon a time like on the brink of death, starving and homeless, and now they have, a level of power because they are helping him patrol the city. And I guess he has that mentality that he's done so much for them. Now they have to be loyal to him, and they do feel like they have to serve him. So the city has been dealing with a lot of crime, and he goes in with those men, and they just are basically trying to clean up the city. Now you can tell that Damon's main objective is to invoke fear amongst people, so that if he ever were to become king, they would fear what he would do. Now the council calls him in to discuss his behavior, and some are for Damon, some are not. Of course, Otto is not for him, and they just kind of go back and forth, and you can tell that Damon really does not respect Otto at all. However, I do think maybe they're going to have an alliance at some point, but that's just what I pick up on. I don't trust Otto, but they are just kind of going back and forth. And Otto has also lost his wife to, they don't say, but Damon kind of throws that up in his face. And so you can just tell those two don't get along at all. But eventually, like the king, he has a soft spot for his brother, so he just kind of slaps him on the wrist and just tells him basically to watch how you deal with the people. There's a better way to get control of the city. Okay, so the games have begun, and the king he has announced to all of the spectators who have come to watch the games that the queen is actually in labor. Now, maybe he ain't allowed to be at her bedside, but why he at the games and his wife and not having a baby? But I'm sure it's a reason why. This is a fictional story. Why am I taking this so seriously? But anyway, so he announces to them that she's about to have, their child, a son. And so he says, and Damon, surprisingly, is going to fight, and I think what they're doing is jousting. I'm sure that's what it is. I can't recall right now. But they're going back and forth with the joust. And is that what it is? Okay, anyway. So Damon actually calls on Otto's oldest son, and they threw me for a loop because I was honestly thinking that he was going to kill him, basically. So they're sitting in the royal box watching the games, and the doctor comes over, and the king is sitting next to the hand, and the doctor goes to the hand. So I guess he probably ain't got access to the king to go tell him what's going on. So he mentions to the hand what is going on, and the hand whispers over to the king, and automatically in that moment you can tell that something is going on with the queen. She's having some difficulties. So the king gets up and he goes to the bedside, and she's having a hard time. She is honestly having a hard time, and the reason why is because the baby is breech. So the doctor tells Viserys that they've given her, I guess, whatever remedy you give to kind of turn the baby around, but it's not working. And so in essence, he basically tells him that he has a decision to make. You either save one or you lose both. Now the king goes to her side, and he's just talking to her, just trying to comfort her, and she is distraught. She's continuing to, kind of go through her labor or whatever, and she kind of calms down. I don't know if it's because the contractions have stopped or if they've given her something, I'm not sure. But the doctor shares with the king that there is a procedure that they've done at the Citadel, extract the baby, which we know is a C-section, but there's no anesthesia, of course. There's nothing. He just has to cut the baby open, and will cut the mom open to get the baby. Now, there's going to be a loss of blood or whatever, and he shares that with the king. So as she's continuing to give birth, he's basically just telling her, everything's going to be okay. They're going to take the baby out. And she feels somewhat of relief because she's thinking that she is okay, when in essence, they just want the baby out and she is going to die. And that is exactly what happens. And before that happens, she's looking at him like she knows what he's done. She knows that he's chosen the heir or the baby over her, and she's upset, but there's absolutely nothing that she can do. And so she lays there and she dies. All right, now Otto goes back to the royal box and he whispers to one person as to what is going on, and it just kind of spreads throughout. And of course, you hear the commotion, so everybody knows that the queen has died. And so, like, one of the last people to get the news was Rhaenyra, and you could just see the fear in her eyes, but she knows that her mother has died. The scene shifts to where they're near the water and they're about to funeralize the mother, and they've actually mummified her. That's the first time that I've seen them do it in the show. Well, in the Game of Thrones they didn't, but the process was still the same, but I've never seen them mummified. But they had her all wrapped up, and guess where the camera goes, y'all? The camera shifts down and the baby done died too. They got him mummified too. So the mother and the baby have died. Now Daemon goes to Rhaenyra and he basically tells her that they're waiting on her. And I was like, well, what they waiting on her to do? But apparently she calls for her dragon, Dracarys, I think that's the name. She calls for him to burst fire onto the mother and the son. And that's what he did. And Viserys just held his head down, and Rhaenyra turns her head to the side, but that was kind of a tough call to make or to do. So why Daemon asked her, I don't know. But he looks at, you know, his brother and just sees him with his head down, and then it just kind of just shows how weak his brother is, and he knows he's weak. So he's really just trying to see how far he can get. Okay, so Otto has called this special meeting because it's some kind of urgency, as he said, for the stability of the realm as to who the next heir would be. Now, they're kind of going back and forth, and keep in mind that, you know, this is like immediately after the funeral. And that is basically Viserys' concern. Like, I just lost my wife and my son. Why are we talking about who the next heir would be? So you can kind of feel in that moment that Otto has ulterior motives. But anyway, so Rhaenys, who is actually the cousin of Viserys, who was in line to be heir as well, her husband basically suggests Daemon. And Daemon, of course, we know if he were to become king, what would happen. But Otto is totally against it. He said he's unstable, he's vile, he's too vicious to be heir. And so the entire time, Daemon is outside the door listening. So he really is, you know, like, his dislike for Otto is building up. But they're just sitting there kind of just talking, and the king basically suggests that Rhaenyra could possibly be the next heir. And of course that is conflict because no woman has ever occupied the Iron Throne before. Now, after the meeting is over, Otto calls for his daughter Alicent to come in. So you can kind of tell that, as I mentioned, like, something's going on with Otto. He has an agenda. So Alicent comes in and he asks her, how is Rhaenyra doing? And she shares, you know, how she's feeling. And Alicent asks him how the king is doing, and he shares. And so basically he asks his daughter, who is, I don't know how old she is, but of course she's young, ask her to go comfort the king and go down. He sent his daughter in to comfort the king, and she goes. He asked her to put on her mother's dress. As I said, she passed away, but put on her mother's dress. And so Alicent goes in to visit the king, and she takes him a book, and just basically, Alicent is smart. She's been trained very well. And she goes in and just talks to him about her grieving process. So she's trying to get on the king's level in a sense, because they both have grieved. She's grieved her mother, and of course he's in the grieving process now. And that was her way to actually get, you know, into the chamber. So it goes off. We kind of can speculate what happened. Now the next scene is very vulgar. I'm not going to go into it, but Daemon is basically putting on a show for the city watch and others. And he's basically just saying, talking about he's going to be the next heir. They're kind of cheering him on because those people are loyal to him. And also he ends up saying that, or basically degrading the son that passed away, the king's son, and saying he was heir for a day. Now this all gets back to Otto. And Otto go carry the bone to the king. And the king is furious. He is so furious. So he actually calls Damon in, and Damon acts as though, um, not necessarily innocent, but like he doesn't know what he's talking about initially. But he goes on to ask him and say, did you say that? And eventually he does say that he said it. He called the king weak. Damon is true to who he is, honestly. I don't think he's putting on the front. That's who he is. So you get what you see. And the king is so upset. He's furious. And he's basically like, how could you do this to me? I've only looked out for you. And Damon's like, if you looked out for me, you wouldn't have sent me to go be over the city watch. I would be right here beside you, basically taking Otto's place. And the king is saying to him, I have a hand. And Damon's like, don't trust him. And I kind of get, why he's saying that. That's the way I feel too. So the king eventually exiles Damon from the kingdom and he sends him on. And what's interesting about this part is Damon, when he first walked in, he didn't address the king as your grace. But upon his exit, he's like, your grace. And you would kind of feel like he's begging for mercy, but he's not. I think what he said when he said your grace, he's trying to save him, as in the king, because if he sends him out that door, he's coming back with vengeance. So he's saying your grace as in save me from hurting you. Now Damon tries to step to the king, basically still begging, and then the guards step in to kind of stop him from going any further. And so he eventually just turns around and he leaves. Now he gets on the dragon. I don't know if he's supposed to have that dragon or not, but he ends up leaving on the dragon. So I feel like he's going to end up having his own, and of course that's going to be his force. But I don't know. I don't know. We're just in episode 1. So after Damon leaves, the king looks down and he's cut himself again. Now something going on with that chair. I don't know what's going on with it, but the camera kind of zooms in to this particular area, but I don't know, but something's not right. So he's cut himself and he ends up going to I guess you can say the dragon, wherever they keep the dragons, but he's kind of like putting his finger or his hand over fire, and Game of Thrones again, referencing that. She basically, what was her name? Daenerys, I think her name was. She could not be burned by fire, so I don't know. But he was actually doing that. I don't know if he was sterilizing the wound or not. But Rhaenyra comes in, and so the two of them are having a discussion, and it's so interesting because it goes back to what Allison said when the new heir is born. Your dad is not going to be worried about you anymore because he has a son. But now that the heir is no longer in the world, he's now trying to bond with his daughter, and he knows that he can't have an heir. So he's telling her that she is going to be the next heir. So the scenes kind of flip back and forth to him having this conversation with her and actually showing her in the proper ceremony for naming her as the next heir. So he's saying to her that he basically is apologizing in a sense because he is not giving her enough credit for being strong and being balanced, because he referenced her as being, I guess you can say, very similar to her mother, but she does have some characteristics that are of leadership. And so they just kind of talk, and he does tell her that she is, just as she gets older and she occupies the throne, to be aware of what's to come while she's in her reign. And he referenced the North and starts talking about the dead, and of course, going back to the Game of Thrones, what he's talking about. But he finally accepts her as his daughter and the next heir. All right, so that's the end of episode 1. That was a lot to unpack. Please go check out this show. It is so good, so good. But as I mentioned earlier, there are some themes and messages that I took, and I'm sure the writer wants you to take from the show. And the very first thing that I took and could relate to was the fact that being a woman, I know that it is hard. And it kind of shows in this story, you're dealing with sexism. People don't feel like you are, not going to say equal, but you can get the job done. And a lot of times, like even present day, men want to always refer to women as being emotional, and that is one of the reasons why they are not in power. However, I will say that men have egos and pride, and that prevents them from being successful. So, what makes you feel like you can get the job done when actually both of them lead to the same detriment? All right, takeaway number 2. You've got to watch the people that's closest to you. If you're not careful, they will destroy you. They have ulterior motives, and you just I'm not saying don't trust, but sometimes the people that are in your circle, they are not for you. Takeaway number 3, don't let people play with you. If people feel like, or you let them get away with it, they will continue to do it over and over again. It's going to intensify. They're going to think you weak. And before you know it, they're going to destroy you. And my final takeaway, you can want something so bad, it does not mean you're supposed to have it. Don't kill yourself trying to get something that is not meant for you. Well, that's it. See y'all next week for episode 2. House of the Dragons, HBO Max, HBO. Y'all check it out.